Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about the newly announced Star Wars line by Hasbro, which is vintage figures on vintage style cards, and I think it's called the collector line or collector series. 6 figures have been announced initially, and they consist of Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, figures that were in the original 12 line from 1978, so Han, Darth Vader there, Luke Skywalker, Leia, a few others, a Stormtrooper. So 6 figures have been announced. They're on a vintage style card. They're double bubbled like this figure is, with a throwback style card which has been aged or aged in an artistic way. So you're going to get a figure like this Han Solo here on a vintage style card, and yeah, it's taken Hasbro, how long have they been since 95 to finally get around to doing this. I'm not surprised they're doing it. It makes perfect sense to me. You're marrying something that has a massive nostalgia kick with something that's very visually appealing, that is the original card back design. So this is a vintage collection figure. You've got the black background, you've got the Star Wars logo there, the sort of name bubble, the Kenner logo. Here you've got a modern figure. So this is one of the vintage collection figures, VC116, and this line's been going since 2010, and it's been really successful. And what you find now is a lot of those figures that were released from 2010 to 2012, 13 are really worth a lot more on the secondary market. So if you check on eBay, most of these figures, vintage collection figures, are worth around 50 to 60 to even more money, yeah, certain figures, yeah. So these cards are very appealing for my generation because you've got a large photograph, you know, it's just such a nostalgia kick. Even though this is from The Force Awakens, this still has that connection just because of the way the card is designed, and you know, you've got a great figure there. And yeah, so that's the vintage collection. So Hasbro obviously realised that that's been a successful line for them, and they must have looked at the secondary market and seen how much those figures sell for. Then we've got here this Han Solo. He's graded AFA 80 near mint, and he's a loose figure that's been graded. So he's from the original time, Hong Kong figure. And you know, for me, this is just such a nostalgia kick. This is one of this first figure I bought, so you know, back in the day, 1978. So I mean, this one's graded, and you know, since 2015 these figures have gone up and up in price, and vintage carded stuff's gone up in price. Everything vintage is just kind of hot at the moment. For many vintage collectors, they've been quite up in arms about this announcement, that how dare Hasbro tread on hallowed ground, so to speak, on what is now a hobby and sacrosanct to many. That how dare they tread on what is considered our territory and reissue vintage figures using the same molds on vintage style cards. You know, how dare they? Even though they have the license to do this, and they have the molds, and you know, and other toy companies have done this with Transformers reissues, Funko series, was it Super 7 figures? You know, they did the Alien line, which was a retro line. You know, figures like this, but you know, from the line of Alien from 1979, that wasn't issued because it was deemed too violent. And so there is a nostalgia, and you know, when people see these things in stores, they want to pick them up. You know, like Gentle Giant did the same, but they did these figures, but in a much larger scale on vintage style cards, and that's been a successful line. So Obviously Hasbro obviously aware of that. Um, so what's annoying people is perhaps the weapons, that these weapons are easily lost and so they're hard to find now. And you know, this is obviously a genuine Imperial blaster. It's got a certain colour to it, a certain texture to it. It's almost translucent, this pistol. And there is a thriving repro market out there, and so these weapons have already been duplicated, and you know, people are, especially in vintage collector groups, especially on Facebook, are quite you know, demeaning of people that make such weapons, reproduction weapons. This is a genuine blaster. You can tell by its sort of the colour of the plastic, the feel, the texture, the sort of rigidity of the plastic. And yeah, so this Greedo's got a Han Solo blaster there. So these weapons you can find in many different shades of blue to black almost, and yes, they are being reproduced now by people that in their own homes, and often the colours are different, and there's the famous float test, so people that are in the hobby can easily spot fake and genuine. So the new figures, when they are issued, will, like this Darth Vader, which is going to be one of the first of the new figures, he's going to be different to this figure because he's going to have different date stamps and marks. Plastic used won't be exactly the same. Figure might be a bit smaller, but it'll have the same lightsaber. So, you know, and he'll be on a card that you can, looks vintage but isn't because it's been aged, and you know, so anyone with a couple of brain cells is going to be able to tell this isn't genuine vintage. So I mean, the big concern is with the weapons. I think people are really worried about these weapons, that, you know, if Hasbro reissues such weapons, that people won't be able to tell them apart from the original vintage. But then again, I don't think the plastic's going to be the same. Look how blue and translucent that weapon is. So I mean, I think that's the biggest fear amongst vintage collectors, is the actual weapons. That if Hasbro reissues the same weapons, they'll be hard to distinguish from the original. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think the plastic they're going to use is going to be exactly the same, and I think they will be able to tell them apart. So, you know, and there are variations with weapons, so, you know, certain weapons come in various shades of blue, black, like I said, and you know, there's the Jawa blaster. That's quite a rare thing to have. Quite nice. So, is this the end of Star Wars collecting, as some have said it will be? Probably not. Will the figures be exactly the same as these vintage figures? Probably not. Will the weapons be exactly the same as these vintage weapons? No, they won't be. There'll be slight differences. The plastic used, they might use a more rubbery plastic, like with that that rocket firing Boba Fett, the gun was quite rubbery. So, you know, so probably they'll use different plastics for the weapons. And look at this lightsaber. The green might be a slightly different shade. Then again, it might not be. They might make weapons exactly the same. But then these were made in Hong Kong mostly, and Taiwan. Little was made in China. Some was made in China, but most was made in Hong Kong, some were made in Spain, Mexico, Macau. So just wait and see. I don't think it's the end of Star Wars collecting, vintage collecting. I mean, Hasbro are doing this to make money because they realise that a lot of the stuff they've issued since 2015 is just languished on the on shelves in stores, and obviously that's possibly why Toys R Us had to, one of the reasons why Toys R Us, obviously the financing of Toys R Us, so, and then, but I think the main concern amongst vintage heads is the weapons, and then obviously the figures. But what it would probably do is bring more people into the hobby rather than, I mean, obviously some may say this is it, people that have collected a lot of vintage stuff say that's it, I've had enough, I'm out of the hobby. But I don't think it's going to really make the prices of these genuine vintage items fall at all, because there's a finite amount of such stuff. There's only so many of these figures out there that are in a good enough condition to get at least an 80, yeah? So, even the loose figures, there's only a certain amount of these figures out there. And they are aging, the stickers are yellowing, the plastic's becoming sticky at times, and all that sort of stuff. But these figures, I mean, they still smell like they did back in the day. Oh man, they smell so good. The new figures will not smell like these figures, man. Oh, I mean, how these figures haven't lost the smell, that, it's just amazing. Oh gosh. So they smell the same. Wow. I mean, I've really looked after these Return of Jedi figures as well, so but wow, I'm on a Star Wars high. But what will this new line do? It will appeal to my generation. It will appeal to younger generations that like that style of card, and that they're familiar with it because of the vintage collection, and they'll see these great pictures of characters, the original trilogy characters, plus these sort of figures that are redone, and they'll go, cool, these look great. Or maybe they say, cool, that this is what they played with when they were kids, these figures are absolute pants. So, it's up to the individual whether they're going to like these figures or not. I mean, I'm not surprised Hasbro's done this. It's all about making money. And obviously a lot of stuff that Hasbro's issued since 2015 has just languished on the shop's display shelves and not done well at all. And obviously that's why something like Toys R Us has just collapsed. So I mean, these figures are just, I'm holding my childhood in my hand, a happier time, happier places, happier memories, less responsibility, just carefree days. So that's why these figures appeal to me. The car back here is just very visually, super appealing, and so I don't think it's the end of vintage collection. I think the vintage stuff is going to stay where it is in terms of price, maybe continue rising, especially if the new film is awful. Episode 9, it has to, because there's so much division amongst the fans, and people are just turning away from the new stuff, and maybe looking at the old stuff, and but we'll see. doom and gloom. I mean, has Hasbro been sacrilegious? Probably not. I mean, it makes economic sense what they're going to do. I mean, that line's already sold out, those first six figures, so whether they're going to be available in the UK, let's wait and see. Let's hope so. I mean, if they're about £10 each, gotta get them, man. Anyway, so hopefully you'll get some of what I'm saying. If you're, you know, I'm just babbling on and on. But it's not the end of the world, don't worry. Hasbro did it in '95, they released a 4-figure pack. Gentle Giant did it with the jumbo 12-inch figures, so, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. Okay, so cheers, bye.